On today's episode, I sit down with Justin Kenna. Justin is the CEO of GameSquare, a publicly traded company looking to redefine what it is to connect with the millennial market in the esports entertainment space. He formerly worked at FaZe Clan as the CFO, helping build out the financial model that has seen it grow to a giant in the space. He talks a lot about what it is to be the CEO of a publicly traded company, his journey, and what that experience has taught him in order to build a business and now be the CEO of something very significant. So first time I had the opportunity to talk to someone who is working at a publicly traded company, obviously a very different pace and insight where all the information is collectively or externally shared. So I hope you enjoy this change of pace. Hi, and welcome to Successful Scales, the show where I interview now successful professionals about their journey and try and garner insights onto any tips that can be applied to your business at home. Whether it's financial freedom or the exit of your company, wherever your journey may take you, the idea here is to simply learn from those who have done it before. I hope you enjoy and you get some value out of this. Buckle up and enjoy the episode. Justin, mate, welcome to another episode of Successful Scales, buddy. How you doing?
Good, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me,
mate. It's great to have you on, and we've had some good chats, and we've caught up for the first time in a while. And I've got to say, we were talking a little bit before we hit record, but and before we sort of jump into who you are, the way we met was pretty out of the ordinary. I think I'd moved to LA a little before you had, and so we sort of came in at a time where it was, for me, definitely a super pivotal time in my career, and seeing where you are today, which is it's pretty impressive. It was pretty fun, fundamental to sort of those building blocks. So really cool to be sitting here. It's probably been nearly 7 years later, having you on the podcast about scaling a business.
After a few wild nights in Venice Beach.
Yeah, definitely. Mate, I never, I don't know if I ever told you, I had a couple of trainings with the LA Dragons, and that actually relit my fire around foot.
I've been loving it.
Yeah, so
are you still doing it?
So no, I tore my ACL the year before last playing footy. Yeah, mate, yeah. And I was on fire. We were no, mate, I was the oldest guy in the team by a lot, but we went all right in Europe when we played for Israel. It was a pretty. We're talking about Australian rules football, the most, the least known game, I would say, globally, but the best. That we both sort of met each other playing it in LA, and then I took it after that. It inspired me to then come into to Israel, mate. So you actually had more of an impact than you realized even then.
And also, it's the third most domestically attended sport in the world. So there you go. Even though on a global scale it's not big, if you've ever been to Australia, it's the be all and end all.
Yeah, wow, I didn't know that stat. I'm definitely gonna pinch that one from you because it's a great way of actually understanding the magnitude. Because it is life. It's life in particularly in Victoria.
For sure. 100%.
Well, mate, we could sit and talk footy all day, but that's unfortunately not what we're up to today. But this, none the same, it's things that we're super passionate about. So, it's going to be a lot of fun. But I know you pretty well, mate. For those who don't, love to just sort of hear a little bit, take us on a journey on your story and sort of where you sit today.
Yeah, for sure. So it's an interesting one, like when you talk about going back to football, because when I was sort of, year 10, year 11 at school, that was kind of what I wanted to do, was play footy, and was pretty focused on, like playing footy, hanging out with your mates, doing all those types of things. And I always did pretty well at school, but certainly wasn't my focus. And I didn't really have any sort of clear path or thoughts on what I necessarily wanted to do when I got out of school. And I actually had a chat with my uncle, who's also my godfather, and he was running Mount Eliza Business School, which is effectively, he would teach, sort of like the way that I would simplify it is teaching university classes to executives. So he would, teach, key executives on negotiation skills and sales skills and pretty basic stuff. But for people that are dealing at such a high level that sometimes, relearning those basic core competencies is really important. And he kind of gave me the advice that we looked at sort of what I was doing at school and what I was good at. And he gave me the advice to go into accounting, which is pretty funny because it's not exactly, the most exciting sort of path to go down. But his thoughts were that if you can do something like accounting, he was an accountant by trade, but never actually practiced it. He obviously went on, did a lot of really interesting things in his career, and his thoughts were really great sort of fundamentals to kind of learn. So I actually went down that path. I did accountancy. I did a traineeship at Ernst & Young. So left a chuka in the country at 17 years old and went to the big smoke to Melbourne. And I was actually studying part-time, working full-time. So it was pretty full on and, going out and drinking a lot and partying and doing all those things you do at that age. But kind of really important in terms of, I think, giving me the discipline to make sure that, you can have a good time and travel and party and explore and adventure and do all those things, which I also think are extremely important, but always putting, your study and getting things done first. And I think that gave me a lot of discipline in terms of having a full-time job, studying part-time. My brother and I actually opened up a bar at the same time, and I was playing football. So I was, 18, 19 years old in Melbourne, 3 hours away from home and had a lot of responsibility at a pretty young age. And I think that put me in pretty good stead. So I went down that route. I got to sort of, finish my uni degree, did my CA, my chartered accountant, which is the equivalent of a CPA, and kind of got to the point where I decided that I didn't want to keep going down the accounting path, and I actually moved over to Goldman Sachs. So had a little stint in investment banking, which was really interesting, right? Like great to learn about capital markets, really interesting to learn about currency and a lot of different sort of learnings there. The market crashed and I also kind of thought, I've done a fair bit of study and I've done a fair bit of work to live and breathe and work in an industry that I don't have a huge amount of control over. So I actually moved over into a consultancy role. I moved up to Sydney. Went from management consulting into running strategy for one of the big four banks in Australia. So I had a bit of a varied background: accountancy, bit of M&A, corporate finance, investment banking, strategy consulting, which again, I think put me in really good stead. For me, it was really about getting the fundamental skills that I could then apply, into an industry that I was passionate about. And that was sort of the missing piece. So, after I think 3 to 4 years in Sydney, I packed my bags and came over to LA, where I was lucky enough to meet your fine self. But it was an interesting one, right? I actually took a pretty big pay cut at the time, and took a role at an experiential agency. I was running sort of finance and strategy there, but it was a really cool job, and it was probably the first time that I did a job that I got to apply, technical skills that I learned in a practical way in a fun industry. And this experiential agency did a lot of marketing and activations for Google and Nike across the states. So a really fun, young sort of workplace, and climbed my way up the ranks there. And interestingly enough, was headhunted to come across to a production company called Madison and Vine. Was running strategy for those guys, and building out a deck and a model to go and fundraise for the business, which I was extremely excited about. I hadn't at that point in time been through that process yet, and at that time I was actually introduced to the guys at FaZe Clan, which obviously not knowing it at the time, but was a sort of career defining moment. This was roughly 4 years ago. So, the gaming industry is certainly not what it is right now. FaZe Clan is now the largest gaming brand in the world. I think they're listed number 3 on the Forbes list at a touch over 300 million in terms of valuation. When I was introduced to the guys, there was, 8 guys working out of the house. The creative director, who actually was a creative director at Playboy and was Hef's sort of right-hand man, he came down in a robe, eating breakfast cereal at 4:00 in the afternoon on a Wednesday for my interview, and I was like, "What's going on here?"
That's
But
unbelievable.
yeah, it was pretty eye opening. He's actually, I don't know what Jimmy's up to these days. He's definitely not at FaZe Clan anymore. But I spoke with the guys for a while. I actually personally wasn't a gamer myself. I grew up playing footy, as we talked about, and cricket and tennis, and much more outdoors, and wasn't a gamer personally, but had a pretty good grasp and understanding of how big the industry was and how quickly it was growing. Not only that, but FaZe Clan had a pretty big following at this time. They weren't a business as such, but they had a huge social media following. And the crux of it was sort of 6 years earlier than that, 4 guys, as most great businesses are, built out of a basement or a house. They rented a house together in New York, young guys, and created a lot of really cool content. And I think they were these cool kids, right? And they were the first 4 kids that were creating content that came out and said, I'm a gamer, gaming's cool, and that's okay. And it's a funny one. It sounds really simple, but I think that really resonated with a lot of people. And they had a lot of great content ideas, and they were doing some really cool things. But I also think that there's so many people, and especially these days, but even then, that are gamers and were gamers, but had this whole thing that was kind of like they're a little bit ashamed of it in a way, to, you know what I mean? Like, I'm a gamer, but that's kind of perceived to be a bit nerdy, or, had a bit of a stigma attached to it. I think that's something that's definitely changed. But, I spoke with those guys for a few months and took a bit of a risk and moved over and joined FaZe Clan about 3 years ago. So I was the CFO of FaZe Clan for the last 3 years. And when I joined FaZe, 8 people working out of a house. I think they're doing a couple of million revenue, pretty big losses, burning a fair bit of cash. Hadn't really built out any really core sort of revenue streams. There was an esports business, there was a bit of content, there was some merch. And, I think over the last 3 years, the growth in terms of revenue, the money that we raised, where we got to, that growth sort of speaks for itself. But I think, one of the things that I'm most proud of within that is that FaZe Clan really paved the way within this industry, that today, as we speak, people understand how large this industry is. But, it's only 3 years ago, but it certainly wasn't the same.
What was it? What was it like? So 3 years, you get there, there's 8 of you, you're the CFO. There is no financial model attached to the business. That's, you said they're burning cash, and it's not really, it's not a sustainable growth model. What was that like coming in, and what was the approach? Because obviously, being the CFO, that's going to be something you're going to be instrumental in creating that. What is, a business that you said 300 million its valuation is now?
Yeah, north of and growing. I mean, yeah, they're on a rocket ship for sure.
So that's in a 3-4 year period now that you're saying that, that. So, mate, I'd love to hear a little bit about what that journey was like, as in, what was it like? What was the discussion you had sort of coming in? Like, JK's coming in, and the expectation is that he's going to turn this into a cash cow, a rocket ship, or, what was sort of outlined for you, and how did you approach it?
No, so it was interesting. I mean, I certainly wasn't coming in as a savior by any means. It was more that there was a need from a finance perspective. I mean, to show how far the business has come, the head of esports was running finance. Like, he was doing both. And it's, to look at that only 3 years ago is pretty crazy. But I think my background in corporate strategy, in corporate finance, looking at M&A opportunities and doing diligence on businesses, in investment banking, and having quite a broad background helped me, because my role was very untraditional from a CFO perspective. And we can jump into more of that as we go along. But I was charged heavily with with raising our funding, with a lot of commercial deals, with a lot of strategy, with bringing in talent and business development. So it was a really commercial based finance role, which is what I loved. And to be honest, probably the reason I ended up moving on, which again, we'll get to, but I loved the commercial part of it. I love the strategic part of it. In terms of the growth and the scale of the business, it was more that, given my background, I was pretty well positioned to help drive some of that. But I mean, it was interesting, right? Because it's kind of the inverse of how you grow most businesses, where you have a concept and an idea and you build out your infrastructure, and then you try to invest in your brand and your audience and building out those aspects. This was the opposite. This was a brand that had an audience that didn't have a business associated to it. So we had a huge amount of eyeballs and this massive audience, but it was kind of like building the plane backwards. So we had to put infrastructure around this brand and actually work out, okay, cool, how do we build out a real business? Who are the key people? What do the different revenue streams look like? And the interesting part of that is that's kind of the question mark, I think, that still remains today over this industry. As many eyeballs as there are and as large as the industry is, there are a lot of entities within this space that are doing reasonable revenue levels, but they're not profitable. And I think the monetization of this industry is where the real question mark still remains. So that was the really interesting and exciting part, was that we had this audience. Okay, cool. How do we monetize that audience? And how do we build a sustainable business that can continue to grow? And within that is a really interesting piece, because FaZe Clan is this, I'd say FaZe Clan really sits at this kind of new intersection of pop culture, right? Between gaming and traditional sports and sneaker culture and music. And they have this real authenticity. And I think a lot of that has to do with the four founders being really disciplined to, we know our audience and we're going to stick to that. So not taking, deals that audience would turn away from, right, just to get dollars in the door. So, having opportunities to create toys and dolls that are, at Kmart and things like that they turned down, and different brands that they didn't want to work with because it wasn't authentic to who they were. As a CFO, a little frustrating at the time, but also,
I'm sure.
Also the right.
Yeah. Well, as a CFO, maybe frustrating, but as the strategic, it makes sense.
For sure.
Mate, fascinating stuff. I mean, that's a crazy ride to be on, to be a part of, such exponential growth. And also, and I know we have to get into what you're doing today. And, for those of you who have gotten to this point, like JK is now officially the CEO. He's the first, geez, I'm not getting my words out today, JK. He's the first person I've had on that's actually the CEO of a publicly listed company. And so for me, super fascinating to sort of dive into some of the differences around that. So maybe I'll let you talk a little bit more about your experience, because that's me. I'm just going to be jumping in and asking questions. So let me give you back the floor, and then I'll save my questions for after.
Yeah, for sure. So I think it's interesting, right? So I joined GameSquare at a similar kind of revenue level to when I joined FaZe Clan. Very, very different in terms of the infrastructure around GameSquare, and we're about to close a deal which changes our sort of rev profile dramatically, and we can jump into that. But really interesting, because I think people listening would probably ask, well, why would you leave FaZe Clan given the exponential growth and where things are at? I mean, for me personally, I have very good relationships at FaZe. A lot of the investors are people very close to me. I raised a lot of their money, leave on good terms, and have nothing but respect and love for FaZe Clan, and excited to watch the continued success there. For me personally, we'll talk about the passion around the growth of the business and the sort of commercial strategy, interest. FaZe at a point of going to the next level now, right? We had exponential growth, and now that growth will continue, but it's about looking at okay, what does a liquidity event look like? And for a CFO, your role then really does become a lot more technical, right? Like needing to, i.e., being a CFO of a publicly listed company is very, very different in the US to being a CFO of a private company, and needing a real passion for financial reporting standards and requirements, which hats off and all respect to those that do, but I don't. And I think realizing that and having the opportunity through one of the key relationships I made at FaZe Clan to come over to GameSquare as a CEO was super exciting to me, because having the opportunity to grow out a business and grow a culture, I think is really important. So we have a great management team. We have an experienced management team, and I can jump into that in a minute. But I think for me, that opportunity to grow a business was what I wanted, and I mean it's been a steep learning curve, but it's been exciting. And I mean we are incredibly well positioned to grow and scale an incredibly successful publicly listed company in this space. And I think the experience that I've had at FaZe Clan puts me in really good stead, because, and I'll go back to this a few times, I think my understanding of how you can monetize this industry is super important. So GameSquare is not a direct competitor to FaZe Clan. FaZe Clan is a sort of a lifestyle gaming brand. GameSquare is, what we're trying to do is build out the sort of biggest media digital marketing agency business within gaming. So we're focused on, high margin areas within this industry. And we want to grow the first publicly listed company of revenue scale that's profitable. And again, I'll go back to it, but if you have a look in this space, there's some huge valuations getting around for entities in this space, but a lot of them are still burning a fair bit of cash. And I think that will change. You'll see more and more dollars coming in, and prize money is getting bigger, and branded deals getting bigger. And we are seeing that, but question marks still do remain around how you truly monetize this industry. If you're not a publisher, if you're not making the games and running the tournaments, how do you make money out of this industry? And I think we're incredibly well placed to answer those questions.
Yeah, I think also it's, you just bring something up. It strikes a chord with me every time I hear it, because it's so true. It's like all these companies that are having, 10, $100 billion valuations that haven't effectively actually made a single dollar of profit into the business. And they've got these wild valuations on future prospects and what's going to happen. It's like the shift of like, what is the focus? It feels to me as it's less about like, is this an idea, or is this a business that's already profitable and making money, but is there the potential in it? And that's like where the focus lies. It's just an interesting space.
For sure. And it's a nascent industry. It's growing so quickly. And look, the revenue dollars in this space are real. The investment dollars coming in are real. The increased spend by CMOs of every major brand, not just brands that you have endemic and non-endemic brands that are making big splashes in this space. You have alcohol brands and brands now that I think traditionally thought, gaming audience is a younger audience, and it's not the case. The market's very fragmented, so the opportunities are enormous. But I mean, you're right. It's an interesting one, because there's a lot built into these sort of implied valuations. So where we're trying to position ourselves is, I guess being de-risked to the fact that we are playing in a high margin area, showing that we can hit profitability, but also being well positioned to still get the upside of future growth in this space.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense to me. So it sounds to me like you've gone on the capital raising route a couple of times, and for me, I've never been down that path. I think it's one where I've heard that it's a full-time job, in it of itself, just, making those relationships and trying to understand, your value prop and your position and how to actually, effectively pitch what it is that you set out to do in the world to have an impact. And when we talk about VCs and investments, it's about commercial gain here. So just, I would wonder, or I'd love to hear sort of your perspective around that that journey for anyone who's looking to raise, or what are sort of the steps that you typically take, and what does that process look like?
Yeah, for sure. So I started that process at Madison and Vine, which was actually, without having gone and raised money, was actually really helpful when I got to that point at FaZe Clan, because I was building, a financial model and a deck and doing all of the groundwork to actually go and raise. Quite often a CFO will be a part of a raise, but not necessarily in charge of it. I think at FaZe Clan, it was incredible experience, but we ended up raising close to 60 million in debt and equity over my time there, which, took up a huge amount of time. We didn't have an IR person. So, my role as a CFO probably was probably hurt in some ways by the fact that I was spending so much time raising money and then dealing with investors. Quite often when you're the person that is raising money, that's the person that investors want to talk to, when they have queries or want to understand. So wouldn't change it for the world. I mean, I really enjoyed the fundraise. It is a grind and a slog. And, we did a road show on the East Coast of Canada and the US, probably 2 years ago now, 2.5 years ago. And, raising money at that time for FaZe Clan is very different than raising it right now. Pretty limited historicals, lots of question marks around the industry, and, getting up in New York and pitching to, 40, 50 bankers in suits it's kind of like, something that you see on The Big Short or The Wolf of Wall Street or a movie. But I mean, it's a really great experience, because I think there's no way of understanding your business any better than being able to pitch to intelligent people that are, thinking about putting their money into your business, right? It's their money, and they're going to, sophisticated, intelligent investors who are going to ask you every possible question about your business and things that you'd never thought of. And my biggest, I think, advice would be to, I was lucky because I was a CFO and a finance background, so I understood the numbers, I built the model, but it's to understand your numbers, understand the fundamentals and the basics of your business before you just go to try to raise money. And I think the second thing is it's about putting yourself out there. You got to put yourself in uncomfortable positions to get anywhere. I think in not even just in business, but in life, but also, you learn a lot by being put in situations, that are challenging. And I think, just not overselling yourself. You answer what you know, and if you don't have the answers on the spot, don't make it up. Just you step away and you come back and you find the right answers, and you move forward. So it was an amazing experience at FaZe. Definitely put me in good stead at GameSquare. I was lucky enough, I think 2 weeks after I joined, we went and raised 8 million Canadian in basically a week of meetings. A very intense week, as you can hear.
How many like 40, 50, you took a presentation deck and you pitched to 40, 50 people in a week, the same pitch effectively?
Yeah. So, I mean, I like it to be as conversational as possible. It really varies and depends, right, on the person's knowledge of the industry and of your business. Also, a different experience doing it for a public company rather than a private company, because with a public company, there's certain disclosures that you have to make. So we were just doing a week of marketing as such. We weren't actually doing a fundraise. And then, after that point, we made it official that we were doing a fundraise. But obviously, we'd spoken with enough people that were interested and were able to fill that up. So that was great. But yeah, I mean, it definitely varies, Yoni. Especially with an industry that is so new, and has such exponential growth that the knowledge gap is enormous. And you sometimes forget how much you've learned along the way, and you start talking about certain things, and you can tell that people are a little glossed over. But I will say that the week that we did, sort of a month or two ago, very different to the week that we did on the East Coast. 2.5 years ago, just in terms of how far the industry has come. There's still a lot of question marks remain around monetization, as I talked about, but people are starting to see that this has become mainstream, right? That gaming is a new form of entertainment. It's more, I think, about understanding how you maximize monetization and profitability in this space, rather than how big the industry is or whether it's here to stay. I think those question marks have dissipated and they're gone. It's been really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's we were having a conversation a couple of weeks ago when we connected last, and I was talking to you about also like the e-commerce space is also, it's blowing up as well. I mean, different points in time in their maturity in where they sit as industries, but since the time we spoke to today, or maybe the first time at the start of February, we saw $1 billion invested in VC capital, or in VC money last year. And then in the month of February, there was a total of 2 billion just in the month of February alone invested. So you're just seeing this absolutely wild sort of exponential growth as well in the space that I'm playing heavily in. And it's like people are just playing catch up. Like everyone understands that there is a huge opportunity here. And it's the people who sort of figure out, how to do it first and better than the rest are the ones that are really going to sort of, get the lion's share here. So sounds like a very interesting position. And, I don't know the numbers when we talk about, active users and engagement levels, but if I had to guess when I think about gaming, me as someone who'd be like a really light gamer, I haven't upgraded to a PS5. I'm on a PS4. I'll play Call of Duty and, UFC in a few games. And, there'll be periods of time where I'll be stuck at it. It's so I can only imagine for the generation that's come after us, just what that looks like today, and beyond. So it's exciting, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you raised a couple of good points. The market's going gangbusters. So, I mean, there's a lot of companies, looking to IPO at the moment. Obviously, there's a lot of interest around SPACs, and it's a really interesting place to be in. If you spoke about e-commerce, but anything really attached to the digital world right now, it's really interesting. And I mean, obviously, gaming is really at the forefront of that because but I think people talk about sort of the growth over COVID, but I think if you look pre-COVID, the growth was exponential, right? COVID just, if anything, fast-tracked that. And also, because you've got your more traditional sort of platforms within media that are showcasing gaming. You've got gaming on the front, browser of ESPN, and you've seen a lot of dollars being spent from dollars that would probably be deployed by CMOs of big brands in traditional sports, because there was a period of time where there were no traditional sports being played. At one point in time, gaming and esports really was the only live sort of tournaments and events going on, that you saw this influx of capital from these really large brands that are here to stay forever now. And I read a really interesting article the other day about that these are now clients for life, right? And I think about just FaZe Clan alone, we had Verizon, Nissan, Burger King. There are a number of really top tier brands come into that space and realize, wow, this is a really powerful brand that has a huge amount of reach. And, Manchester City is another really good example. And I think I've talked to you about this. We had a really cool collaboration with Man City, and the guy, Jan Newmaster, who's actually my head of Europe at GameSquare. And Jan's great. We should get him on this pod at some point as well. Jan actually built out the media business at Manchester City. And, we were able to do a collaboration between Man City and FaZe Clan. It's funny because I was talking to our research guys earlier today, and it's really interesting because, guys my age and older look at it and say to me, why is Man City doing a deal with FaZe Clan? And then guys younger than me look at it, and kids all across the world are looking at it going, why is FaZe Clan doing a deal with Man City? And that's actually the truth, right?
It's so wild. It's just such a
Yeah.
crazy, it's such a crazy thing. And I've got to say as well, mate, watching the shift of your Instagram when you really got into FaZe Clan, mate, just knowing how much you love sports, you would have been absolutely loving every minute of that, surely.
Well, I find it really interesting, and yeah, I know, we always talked about it. I'm not a huge gamer. I mean, obviously my understanding has grown enormously, and if anything, I actually think it's been a bit of a benefit because I've been able to step back and look at, okay, how do I approach this like a business? And my understanding, I went and spent some time with our Counter-Strike team in Atlanta through a tournament, went to the Fortnite World Cup in New York, and I mean, how good these kids are cannot be understated. Like, and it's funny because everyone's like, oh, the Fortnite World Cup had $30 million in total prize pool money, which is, I think, bigger than any golf or tennis tournament ever.
And these are like teenagers winning these
the
sort of
average
prize
age,
pools.
so there's three competitions, but the main two are doubles and singles, and you have 100 teams, so 200 kids in the doubles and 100 kids in the singles. And for the individual comp, the average age of the qualifier was 16.7 years old, right? So the kid who won, he won 3 million individually. I think he's from the UK, 16-year-old kid. So pretty crazy stuff. But it's funny because people look at it and go, oh, I should have spent more time gaming. I should have played Fortnite and I could just be there. People just underestimate how good these kids are. And it's pretty similar to like, the kids. And again, it's, I miss this boat. So it's a different age group to myself, but I think it's a bit of the old adage of progress or, adapt or die, right? Like you need to understand what it is. And people look at like these famous YouTubers and like, oh, these kids don't do anything. And you don't become that famous and you don't make that much money if you're not talented. And the grind and the hard work that these top tier kids do that are gamers or content creators or whatever they are, that's a real thing. There's a talent to it in terms of the level of production quality that they can create so quickly, how engaging they are, how often they're posting. I mean, it's a different world for sure, but these kids are incredibly talented.
Fuck, man, are we old?
Yeah, definitely old.
Seriously,
Definitely old.
I mean, it's a relative thing, but it is crazy. Like I look at sort of my younger cousins in America, and what they're up to, and just absolutely glued to it. And it's they'll sit there like, I still can't process. I still, it doesn't make any logical sense to me. Why would I sit there and watch someone play games rather than play them myself? And yet people elect to sit and just watch the best in the world. Like it's really at that level.
It's funny because, and I've been asked this and I give the same example, right? It's like if you play tennis, why do you go to Wimbledon and watch tennis players? You're watching the best in the world. But the even more powerful thing than that, you think about this, right? If you go to an NBA game and you're in LA and you go and watch the Lakers, right? There's probably less than 5%, maybe less than 1% in that crowd that's currently playing basketball, and maybe less than 10% who's ever played at a competitive level. These gamers, these kids, they're all gamers. So not only is this audience so large, they're incredibly engaged, which is so powerful when you think about brands wanting to connect this end consumer, right? It's huge eyeballs, but the engagement level is through the roof. So it's an incredibly powerful place to be. And in terms of just going back to GameSquare, the entity that I'm running now, I mean, our whole ethos is connecting top tier brands to this ever growing end consumer, being these growing esports and gaming communities. We are connecting brands to end consumer, and we're competitive. We are very well placed to do so. And I think it's really compelling because this huge audience it's not just kids. There is a huge audience between the ages of 20 to 35, which is, as you well know, high disposable income and an audience that brands have been trying to capture forever.
Yeah, it's a super interesting time and a super interesting space to be in, and I'm excited to sort of follow along and see what this turns into. I mean, I see that I clearly understand the value proposition and what you're looking to do here, and if and when done right, I think it's hugely valuable. The ROI for brands direct to that level of engagement, because it's all, the whole thing about like Snapchat and its initial valuation. I think it's like, how many apps did, or how many things in the history of our existence did you have 100% focus of, a 10 minute, um a 10-second experience where you're sitting, you're literally holding your finger down to watch it, and it disappears, like you are entirely focused. So I guess it's the same as well. Like, I look at gaming is almost a form of meditation for me. Even though, I'm someone who's, a high achiever and always thinking about work and what I can do, and I could always do more, and never quite satisfied with the output. But in moments like that, when you're gaming or potentially watching someone play games, it's like it's both cathartic and sort of hyper focused. So the value around the eye share and the engagement, I can understand, coming from a marketing background, makes sense to me.
For sure. And I think that's, it resonates a lot, right, with, musicians and athletes and celebrities. And you look at every young NBA and NFL player, like they're all gamers, right? Because they, they're training and they're competing at a really high level under a lot of pressure, but they also have a lot of time. And I think you're right. I think a lot of people do use gaming as an escape, as downtime, and a way to, kind of escape that pressure and stress. And I think there's a lot of, it's a bit of a watch this space, right? With the crossover into sneaker culture, into music, into sport, into traditional sort of forms of entertainment. Gaming is the new form of entertainment, esports specifically. And I think it's a bit of a watch this space as you continue to watch that, crossover. And again, really sitting at this new intersection of pop culture.
Yeah. Well, I also know that I'm gonna have to let you go in a few minutes, but I definitely, just knowing that, where you're sitting today, it's a different world. When you talk about privately held versus publicly traded, in terms of, like, you mentioned before, you couldn't start looking to do an investment round or a capital raise until you actually made out, gave a public announcement that you guys were actually looking for funding. I'd love if you can sum up some of the key differences into what it is, running a publicly listed company versus privately held. Like, what are some of the roadblocks, challenges, interesting things, opportunities? I don't know, anything that comes to mind.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, I think in its simplest form, the way of thinking about it, right, is if you're a private company, depending on, how you've made up your shareholders and your board, you can have very few shareholders, right? It's a private company. The public can't invest in your company unless you allow them to. So, you can be a founder, an owner, and you can make decisions, without much accountability. Obviously, that's not always the case, because a lot of private companies will raise money and there'll be more shareholders who want more of a say. But effectively, you can retain control and, operate the company as you see fit, largely. Now, when you're a public company, clearly that's not the case. So, look, there's definitely advantages to both. I think if, obviously in the public markets, it gives you a greater ability to scale and scale quickly. But with that comes, increased scrutiny around the fact that, for that very reason, right, you're public. So your information is public. People can look up and see how much money you earn. They, people have the ability to, understand.
Straight to Google after this.
people, people can understand, a lot more information about your business, given the fact that, you have to disclose anything material, than they do if you're private. And I'd say, without getting into the crux of all of the differences, that's the main difference. And as you start to think more and more about a business and how you run a business, understanding that when you're public, that information is publicly available. I think that's, the key thing to kind of think about.
Yeah, I guess it's it's not counterintuitive, but like for the typical entrepreneur, that might feel like constraints, but also, it's a trade-off. You get access to a whole lot more capital, and if you're making good decisions, that's going to increase through investment, and the valuation, the opportunities continue to shift and grow. But obviously you have to go through that process every single time to make sure that it is disclosed. So there's, again, pros and cons, mate. I know I got to let you go now, and we've got a hard stop in a second. So before I let you go, I'd love if you had sort of any, and I'm really putting you on the spot here, but if you've got any words of wisdom, you've had a pretty incredible journey today, and I know we were having a laugh before that we're old. We're in the first third of our career, if not the first quarter, depending on how far you want to push it. So plenty of years left, but you've learned a lot in this time. Anything that's really been sort of valuable in that time that you think, if I'd heard that, it would have had immense value to me at an earlier stage in my professional career?
Yeah. So I don't know if it's necessarily if I heard that, but my kind of advice would be that you make your own luck. So, people look at situations and presume that someone was lucky or whatever it might be. I mean, I think that in this day and age, and I think you would attest to this as well, Yoni, that a lot of people want instant gratification. And, I don't think that results in success most of the time. Really is about, educate yourself, become technically good at what you do, because that'll put you in good stead. So, for myself, as an example, I took some risks for sure. There's been a little bit of luck involved, but there's absolutely no way I would have been able to be in the position I am if I didn't go through, the technical learning and training to understand my craft in a lot of different areas and aspects that I could then go and apply. So my advice would be, don't look for a quick fix. Learn your skills, learn your craft, understand what you want to do, and then go and apply it. Because the good thing is, you then position yourself in a way to be able to take risks. Because if they don't work out, you can go back and rely on, the base knowledge and skills that you've learned, and you can go back to your other job or whatever it may be. But, it's about taking calculated risks, I think, and applying technical skills.
Man, that's super sound advice. And also, given the fact that, I think you said at 17, you moved from the country into Melbourne, took on like an apprenticeship or internship, and you opened a bar, and like you had so many things going on concurrently, playing footy, at a serious level as well. It's that work ethic and making your own luck and putting yourself in the position to get lucky that I think is one of those things that will always set you up. It's that consistency, hard work, and dedication. There is no quick fix or shortcuts to get to, to sitting in, in a position like that.
100% agree. Yeah.
Well, mate, I'm going to let you go, but if anyone wanted to get in touch with the company, look for media space, I'm not sure exactly how it's structured, but anyone that's listening in and says, wow, GameSquare looks like an interesting opportunity on any front, what's the best way for them to reach out?
Yeah, for sure. So we have an agency business here in LA where we connect brands and consumer through all types of soup to nuts campaigns within this space. We have a UK influence agency. We have 2 team-based assets currently, continuing to grow out. You can jump online, and hit us up at GameSquare. There's contact details on there, through social media and all those types of avenues. But, all the information's publicly available, and, people can email me or Kevin, my president. I think his details are actually on the site, but he's Kevin at GameSquare.com, and I'm Justin at GameSquare.com, and we're always open to looking at new opportunities. So, feel free to reach out for sure.
Awesome. Well, JK, mate, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks again for taking the time out of your busy day. You're telling me about the routine, how you got 2 hours at some ungodly hour that you without camera and then on camera. So I understand you are pushing, every boundary and making that luck. So really appreciate the time, mate.
Thanks, mate. Good to see you again.
You too, buddy.